Hey everybody, this is my 40-gallon waterfall tank, and the other day I caught a mystery fish and I put it in the tank only to find out that my eyes were deceiving me and it was no mystery at all. And what I did was I put a stupid creek chub here in the tank. So now I need to take the creek chub and I need to put it back in the creek where I got it. And every time I do something like that, I get comments from people in regards to the legality of releasing fish and whether or not I should and what I can and can't do. And so I want to have a little chat about that this evening. I'm doing a big water change on my actual native tank at the moment. So we're going to let that drain down a little more and then I'll pause the video while we get it filling back up. And so we've got a little while to talk. So, first of all, let me clarify that when I talk about knowing the law about this and knowing the law about that, that's not necessarily true. Just because you've read a law and you see it in black and white does not mean you've properly interpreted the law. That's why we have lawyers and judges. I'm neither. So I'm not going to pretend I know the law. But there are some things I know I'm allowed to do, and there are some things I know I'm not allowed to do, and we can talk about those. I also want to talk about intent. You know, the intention behind these laws, what the purpose of them is. I want to talk about the state of Maryland in particular. And I also want to talk about a theme I get in the comment section. Every time I talk about doing this, that's where we're going to start, in fact. Every time I talk about releasing fish, I always get told about some mystery pathogen that lives in tropical fish tanks, although I've never fully had the tropical part of a fish tank defined to me, what makes a tropical fish tank a tropical fish tank. But there's some pathogen that can live in tropical fish tanks that somehow does not kill native fish when they go into the fish tank, but the fish will get that pathogen or something, get it on them or in them or something. I'm not entirely sure how that works. But when I release them back into the wild, then this tropical pathogen somehow gets unleashed into the water system and I wipe out an entire waterway. And yes, I've been told more than once by multiple people that I can wipe out an entire water system by releasing some minnow that I've had in one of my fish tanks for a few days. And I'm just fascinated by this idea. What pathogen could possibly do that? First of all, I'm not sure what we're talking about when it comes to tropical fish tanks. So if we are talking about tropical, like above 83 degree temperatures, I don't have any of those. All of mine are cold water by those standards. My warmest tank is about 78 degrees. If it is a tropical pathogen, then how's it going to survive once it gets released into the cold water stream across the street? If it's so deadly to native fish, why doesn't it affect the fish when I put them in the tank? I mean, I have so many questions about this theory about how I'm going to release some pathogen into the water that's going to wipe out an entire waterway, and yet my fish live happily and peacefully in it when it's here in my fish tank. That's just, I'd love to know more about this. So I don't worry about that. That's science fiction. I'm not going to release anything from my fish tank into the wild that's going to wipe it out. The only things I might have in my fish tank would be the kind of things that would be in the stream anyway. Ick or columnaris, stuff like that. Gill flukes, common parasites and pathogens that I would get in the stream anyway. In fact, that's kind of my point. What I really wanted to talk about when I started thinking about shooting this video was the idea that I'm kind of done with putting new fish from the stream into this tank. I do still have my trap out. I am still kind of hoping to get some rosy-side dace. But at this point, I'm not even so sure I want to put them in the tank because I'm far, far more likely to bring something home from the stream and put it in my tank that would wipe it out. In fact, I've done that twice. I've brought ick home from the stream, and I've brought columnaris home from the stream. And the columnaris wiped out my entire native tank in about 3 days. Well, a few fish survived, but that was about it. So that is far more likely that I'll bring something home rather than take something there. Ick is very common in the wild, but the way ick lives, as it basically releases its little swimmers and they go looking for new host fish, in an aquarium, you're shooting fish in a barrel, and the little swimmers are just going to crawl all over those fish. In the wild, those little swimmers that are looking for a host fish, the vast majority of them never find a host fish in a fast-moving stream. The ones that do, a few fish may get a few little pathogens boring into their skin, but the chances of that happening twice in a row is slim. So no one fish really gets affected that much by the ick. In an aquarium, the fish keep getting reinfected and reinfected and reinfected, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, and it's deadly very quickly in a fish tank. It's harmless in the wild. And this is usually the case. So I'm not so worried about, in fact, I'm not at all worried about taking anything from this tank and putting it into the wild or anything like that. I am worried about the other way around, though, and now that I've got some really nice fish in here, I don't really want to take the chance on losing them because I brought some stupid parasite or something home from, just catching some minnows down the street. That would not be something I want to do. So, just kind of keeping an eye on this tank. I don't want to let it get too low, but at the same time I want to drain a good amount of water out of it tonight. I really want to give a good water change on here. So, let's talk about the things I can and can't do and the intention of what these laws are. A lot of people think the laws are to avoid invasive and non-native species, and to some extent that's true. But in a lot of ways, it's very specifically for very specific non-native species. Here in Maryland, we have a big problem with zebra mussels. Cost us millions and millions of dollars a year trying to combat the zebra mussels. So we have a lot of laws that are specifically designed to prevent the spread of zebra mussels. We also have a type of algae that we have laws that are specifically designed to prevent the spread of that particular algae. About 40 miles south of here, in a little strip mall down in Landover, a little drainage pond is where the first snakehead was found. So Maryland has snakeheads in it. We do have laws regarding that. If I ever catch a snakehead, I am not allowed to put it back. I have to kill it and or return, basically take it to the Department of Natural Resources and show them, here's a dead snakehead, and tell them where I caught it and all that kind of stuff so we can document the movement of them around the state. So we do have laws that are designed very specifically to prevent certain things from being spread around. But when you start looking at some of the things I am allowed to do, it gets a little bit head scratching, and that's where this whole question of intent gets to me. So hang on for one moment, let me get that tank filling back up, and then I will talk about some of the things I am allowed to do that will make you scratch your head. Okay, so I am allowed to use live bait, but I have to do certain things for that live bait to be legal. I have to buy it from a certified zebra mussel-free bait shop, and I have to use it within 24 hours. In other words, if I'm out fishing and a environmental police officer approaches me and asks to see what I'm fishing with, and I say I've got these live bait here, I will need to produce a receipt from a tackle shop, a bait and tackle shop that is within 24 hours old. Any older than that, and I get my bait confiscated, and I get a ticket, and so on and so forth. And keep in mind that also, when we're talking about things like breaking the law here, I'm not talking about going to prison for my crimes. I'm talking about getting a ticket because I did something I wasn't supposed to, kind of thing. If I get caught, fishing with the wrong kind of bait or something, that's the kind of consequences we're talking about here. So if it is technically illegal for me to release these fish, then that's the kind of illegality we're talking about. We're not talking about, 10 years in the federal pen because I released a minnow across the street. At most, I might get a ticket. More than likely, I'll get told, don't do that again, and that'll be the end of it, if I'm not even allowed to do that in the first place. So, I am allowed to use live bait. I am allowed to catch my own live bait, but I have to catch it where I'm fishing. And it also says very specifically, because I thought I was going to be a clever dick and say, oh, well, I caught these minnows up in Murphy Run by my house, and it does flow into Pretty Boy Reservoir. So technically, anywhere in Pretty Boy Reservoir, I'm still in the same body of water. and they've already got ahead of me on that one. If you are not fishing where you caught the crayfish or the bait or whatever, you're not allowed to do that. You have to be right there at the spot. And it says very specifically in the rules that you cannot catch it upstream or downstream. It's got to be where you are fishing. And again, this is so we don't transfer zebra mussels. It's not because I'm worried and anybody's worried about the species of minnow being moved. It's what I might transfer from one body of water to another. So that's our real serious concern here, is what we transfer from one body of water to another. We have really strict rules about what you have to do with your waders after you've gone in one stream, how you have to clean them before you go in the next stream. I can only take my kayak in certain bodies of water because I'm not allowed to potentially transfer zebra mussels or algae. Again, it's the transfer of these invasives that we already have that is the big concern. It's not so much moving the minnows from across the street to down the street. Nobody cares if I catch one of these creek chubs, it stays in my tank for a week, and then I put the creek chub back in the creek where I caught it. Putting it in a different creek would be a different story, because then I might be transferring something into a different body of water that hasn't been contaminated. And to prove that point, the crayfish I use are non-native. The rosy minnows that I can get to use for bait are non-native, and I'm allowed to use them in any body of water I want. I can effectively go buy them by the dozen and legally just release them into any body of water. Those are all non-native. We stock rivers around here with non-native trout. We stock ponds with non-native fish all the time for sport fishing. This idea that I'm moving minnows from one place to another, or that it's not specifically a native fish, that's, again, not really the concern. It's these existing invasive species that we have, and the transferring them from one body of the water to another is where most of the laws here in Maryland revolve around. Now, if I were catching and releasing non-native fish, that's a different story. If I was releasing snakeheads that I bought, at a grocery store or something like that, or if I was releasing some sort of invasive species that could survive around here, that might be a different story. But I'm not talking about doing that. I'm talking about catching fish, keeping them in a fish tank for a little while, and then releasing them right back where I caught them. And again, I've never yet found anything that says I'm not allowed to do that. And finally, I will say that I am also allowed to use a type of fish. Well, let me ask you this real quick. Would you think that it would be against the law, breaking the law, for me to take goldfish and release them out at Pretty Boy Reservoir, for example? Do you think I'd be allowed to do that? Legally, I don't know. I might not be allowed to do that, but I know I can go up to a bait and tackle shop and I can buy black salties, and I can use them for bait all day long and release them out into Pretty Boy Reservoir without any consequences whatsoever. And if you don't know what a black salty is, a black salty is a black goldfish that has been bred to be salt resistant. I live near the Chesapeake Bay, and where I am, you don't have to go too far to get to tidal and brackish water pretty much in any direction. And people don't like spending a lot of money on bait fish that they're just going to die after 3 or 4 casts because they can't tolerate the salty water. And so they've bred these black salties to be much more salt tolerant. So I'm allowed to use them wherever I want. So not only can I buy goldfish to go release into Pretty Boy Reservoir, they're modified goldfish. And so again, this notion that putting non-native species in the water that's the big trauma. That's just not how it really works around here. That's not what anybody's too concerned about. The zebra mussels are the really bad thing. And then, of course, we've also got that algae. I'm not sure the name of the algae, but it's an unusual algae. It actually lives in pristine water. It has its own nitrogen fixers, and therefore is not bothered by living in pristine water. In fact, it thrives in some of the rivers we have around here that are nitrate free, and yet they're just loaded with this algae. And that's something that we really worry about, because it chokes the rivers off and kills the rivers, and that stuff will destroy an entire waterway, and that stuff can simply be transmitted from one stream to another by wearing felt-soled waders. Felt-soled waders are now against the law in Maryland because of that specific problem. So we do have our concerns. I do know what they are. I am certainly aware of issues we have here in the great outdoors in Maryland. I do love my Maryland outdoors, and if I thought for a moment that I was risking my stream or habitat around here or anything by releasing these little minnows back into the wild, I certainly would not do it. But again, that's fantasy that I'm going to release some sort of mystery tropical pathogen, into the wild. That's reminiscent of maybe like if I went on vacation to Borneo or something, I'd have to get my feet amputated because I got jungle rot or something. Like I could see that. There are tropical bugs that might bore into my skin and lay eggs in me if I was in those tropical environments. I get all that. But this tropical fish tank idea, I got guppies and stuff swimming around in 70-degree water, 75-degree water. I don't know how that counts as some tropical. And again, that's just fantasy. There's nothing in this tank that I'm going to be releasing that is going to go and wipe out an entire waterway or anything like that. So feel free to leave your comments. I'm sure you will anyway. I'm dying to hear what people have to say about this and what your thoughts are. Make sure you're subscribed. That way you won't miss anything I've got coming up. You never know what it's going to be with me. And here in a few days, hopefully, we're going to have a lot of flowers happening in my waterfall tank here. So thanks again. See you on the next one.